Hi everyone and welcome to week 11. This week we're looking at HRD and diversity, and in a second part at cross-cultural HRD. So looking at diversity, first of all, we're looking at our individuals' diversity awareness and sensitivity, identifying meanings and debates about diversity in organisations, and looking at the role of HRD in facilitating diversity in organisations. So a central principle is that all employees will be treated with fairness, dignity and respect, and HRD has a critical role in bringing about changes in individual and collective behaviour. So that is basically the link there between HRD and employees in organisations. So what does it actually mean? This resource that I've attached here is also on the front of the site, so you may have looked at it, but it's a series of clips and information about individual employees and accompanying information that shows how the federal government in Australia is responding to the diversity agenda. So think about the points that are coming out in these clips. For example, the physical aids and support, the support and encouragement from management, various HR strategies such as mentoring that are coming into play, and also have a think about the costs and the benefits. So the costs to the organisation of equipment and so forth, and the benefits to the individuals and to the organisations. So this is the public sector. To what extent do you think these approaches could, should occur in the private sector? Or voluntary organisations, small businesses, that sort of area, those sorts of areas. So there are competing arguments in this area. So there's moral imperatives that we suggest that we should offering equal employment opportunities to all. There's about business benefits. So if you have a multicultural society, as we do, it makes sense to have multicultural groupings in our organisations. We have people with needs and disabilities in our community, therefore they should also be represented within organisations as a point of connection and communication. Compliance with legislation. We do have increasingly legislation which suggests that employees should be treated equally, and there's a social justice perspective that we should not leave people behind who have particular needs, and corporate social responsibility around the idea that organisations should give back to communities and play their part in developing a just society. So there's some arguments to think about. Just as an overall HRD model from your textbook, when we talk about changing behaviours, we know that we're looking at intervention, so education, training, development. So it could be education about policies. It could be offering specific training and development, looking at learning for individuals and within the whole organisation. So you have a learning organisation which can pick up on these ideas and make sure that people are treated equally, whether it's during selection processes, performance reviews, opportunities for promotion. And so there's some facilitation, direction, management, and developing a competence culture based on knowledge, skills and values, and that will lead to behavioural changes across the organisation. That's the model there. So some conceptual and theoretical ideas about diversity. There is a shift from equal opportunities focus to a diversity focus. So equal opportunities tends to conjure up an idea of quotas that will be put in place to check that all minority groups are present. That has gone largely from our thinking, and it's more the idea, as you can see on the model previously, that we offer education, training and development for everybody, and we look at changing a workplace culture that is accepting of diversity and diverse views. So some other issues, this sameness versus difference is a paradox. Employees cannot and should not be treated the same, but they need full awareness of equality and social justice issues. So in one hand we're saying, okay, some people need special attention or additional assistance or whatever it might be, but then on the other hand we are also saying, but you know, we also need to treat people the same. So this is a bit of a balancing act and awareness of where you sit within that. Another paradox is the focus on the individual, and that is very much within organisations. Obviously in selection, most performance appraisals are looking at individual outputs, but on the other hand we argue that teams are important too. So a diverse team is important, and that goes beyond just that individual approach. So these are some of the issues that we grapple with in this area. And thirdly, diversity can take many forms and refers to a range of characteristics. Could be age, disability, cultural background, etc. It can be seen quite broadly as different points of view, attitudes. So some of the issues and concerns, managing diversity really gets at the idea of valuing the people already in the company and giving them opportunities to achieve their potential. So providing perhaps extra mentoring help or extra equipment or whatever it is that might help. Diversity training, is more about programs that are aimed at facilitating positive group interactions, reducing prejudice and discrimination, and enhancing the skills and knowledge and motivation of people to interact with diverse others. So this is around often looking at our own perhaps biases, prejudice, outlook, experience. We may never have in fact met people from a certain country, and so we don't even really have any knowledge about them at all. So these sorts of issues in terms of education. To have diversity training in an organisation, that would need to tie into your strategic direction, whether there is a needs analysis, implementation and evaluation. So there's your 4-stage model again. In other words, having programs that are really suited. There is, however, a lack of critical evaluative research on diversity training. So yes, we tend to think it's good, but really it hasn't been proven. So a lot of the programs there are thought to work, but you know, whether they work in the long term is actually very important to look at. So we go back to Kirkpatrick's evaluation model. Yes, people might feel positive at the end, they might have good reactions, but in 6 months' time, has it made any difference? Has it transferred to the workplace? And also there's a fair bit of misunderstanding about the term managing diversity. So these two definitions here give you an overview of those two. Okay, so costs and benefits, we apply this in every area of HR, as you know. So programs tend to either focus on awareness or skills training. So one way is to look at your own biases, your own prejudice, your own awareness of diversity issues, and some other programs focus more heavily on skills training. So communication training, how can I talk to people from different backgrounds? You know, what sorts of things do I need to be aware of in my performance reviews? Those sorts of things. So there are costs and benefits of diversity policies. So all training has costs, but the benefits include presumably, reduced employee turnover and absenteeism, and possibly you will also achieve improved work quality, job satisfaction, morale and competitive advantage. So to really progress in this area, we do have to obviously develop the models, but all the training, but also have very good assessment processes. So as mentioned before, Kirkpatrick's model assesses the reactions and learning at the end of the training and longer term aspects around transfer of skills to the job and beyond to the organisation. For example, profitability and engagement of employees. So when we're looking at delivering diversity through HRD, as mentioned in the previous slide, awareness training can be focused on a particular workplace context. It can cover large numbers of people at a reasonable cost. So you could have an awareness training approach. It could even be focused on your own awareness of the policies and what they mean. But it can be very general, lack of influence on behavioural change that would really enable a cultural shift in an organisation. It shouldn't amount to a quick fix. And it must respond to the changes within society, the organisation and its strategy. So awareness, we need to understand what the legislation is and how that affects our organisation, for example. So in terms of a skills-based approach, which is the other main way, assists learning and development on an individual basis and promotes, hopefully, deep long-term learning and behavioural change. So some of the ideas we talked about before in active learning, so role plays, issues like that really help us to gain skills into our communication. It's obviously time consuming and costly and should be supported by effective coaching and development long after the initial intervention. So we've talked about coaching with reference to leadership training. If any skills-based training we're delivering needs to have follow-up, as you know, so that it can transfer properly into the workplace. In terms of leadership development and links with diversity, yes, awareness, that can be of your own perceptions and your own biases and just of what policies are out there and putting yourself in someone else's shoes, those sorts of things. Another way of looking at leadership development, and this can obviously go with awareness, is promoting an inclusive workplace. So making sure that people have opportunities within a workplace. So if there's an acting position, for example, that perhaps that could be open to various people, and not putting blinkers on in relation to what people can do, but who has got the skills to do this. And skill development for yourself, so how to communicate and respond to equity issues. So it is very much part of leadership development. So awareness also obviously includes reflecting on your own characteristics and your own diversity. So for example, cultural background, which we'll talk about in the second part of this lecture, is a system of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviours and artefacts that the members of society use to cope with their world and with one another, and are transmitted from generation to generation through learning. So obviously if you're from a different cultural background to the mainstream, you would have had more opportunity to reflect on that, what it means and issues around that. Likewise, if you're from the dominant group, it's important to be aware of other people's cultural backgrounds and the issues that might throw up for them. So, in conclusion, we've discussed diversity management policy and practice and talked about cultural change within an organisation, so all culture there. It's a bit confusing, national culture versus all culture. Looked at HRD interventions, so how we need to disseminate organisational policies, awareness training and skills development, and also some ideas around having some positive action programs that can be relevant to the whole organisation. Particular activities particular HRD interventions, management and team development programs, leadership development, and that can involve and should involve both awareness and skills development. But a key feature is making sure that we evaluate these programs and keep an eye on the literature to show us which the sorts of programs that are really most effective. So secondly, we're looking at cross-cultural HRD, which is more focused obviously on cross cultures and is quite a specialist area. So the background understanding is institutionalist versus culturalist approaches. So one broad brush way to look at organisations is through noting the importance of different national institutions or business systems in explaining comparative differences in HRD. So differences across countries are to do with the way organisations are established and run in the different countries. So consider the cultural patterns as dynamic and emerging characteristics linked to historical development with close relationships to specific institutions and social groups. So the study of institutions is quite a big area in employment relations. So on the other side, there is the importance of national culture, which is more used to explain the differences. So the collective enactment of beliefs and values or shared cognitive ideas, structures and understanding. So that these patterns within organisations, managerial beliefs and behaviours are driven by shared understandings and ideas. So one way is through the institutions that have been developed and the other is through the national culture, and I think you can actually argue that they're related, but anyway, that's a way of conceptualising this. So theoretically, institutional perspective places importance on understanding macro level societal institutions that govern control of resources. So, for example, in some cases, interlocking institutions may encourage cooperative behaviour. So in Japan, Germany, Austria and Sweden, it's been shown that their behaviours, the behaviours of organisations can be interlocked and they can work together to achieve broad outcomes. While in others there's a more competitive system, such as in the USA, where these institutions won't necessarily work together. They might be working, in fact, competitively. The cultural perspective places emphasis for understanding on background cultural differences. So culture is shared, it's not unique to individuals, it's learned through experience, so it's not genetic, it's to do with where you're actually brought up, the culture you're brought up in. Symbolic, so different cultures have different symbols that separate them from others. It's patterns. You can see that patterns are structured and integrated, so that a certain way of feeling about the country, for example, a certain way of respecting the culture is integrated, say, with the way schools operate, something like that. So things are integrated together and structured. And it is adaptive, so that we do have a capacity to change. So a culture that existed some time ago is developing into the future. So there are many different ways of looking at culture, and this has been studied. So how we relate to the world, time and space. So one of the best known ones is the second one here, differences in national culture, behaviour, attitudes, and that's Hofstede, including power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term orientation and indulgence. So these are some of the areas that are thought to differentiate cultures, and there's been some support for these. So power distance in Australia, for example, the power distance is not very great, but in some Asian countries it's actually very great. You wouldn't approach your manager using their first name, for example. So it's quite a difference there. And so when students say come here from an Asian country, they can be quite taken aback by that informality here. And there's other differentiations there that have been put forward. So some examples from China and the Middle East. The contemporary Chinese business system actually consists of a mixture of business models. So it's not as unified as we might think. And the Arab culture and the Chinese culture are undergoing rapid change with the emergence of more individualistic values. So with greater exposure to the Western world, I guess, they are developing this more individual approach. However, the influence of family and networks remains very powerful and exerts a great influence on HRD, such as who is selected to provide training or who is selected for training and development initiatives in both Arab countries and in Chinese countries. So we think that is stronger than in Australia. So, what is cross-cultural HRD? Formal efforts or planned interventions to prepare for more effective interpersonal relationships and job success overseas. So we do have cross-cultural HRD specialists, and when people are, say, selected for jobs overseas, expatriate training, then these people are involved in this awareness raising, skills teaching and discussion about how they're going to fit into the organisation. So it's used to assist communication teamwork in global companies, so companies that have a global presence and people are interacting with people from all different cultures. That's obviously important for global organisations. Expatriate assignments, as I mentioned, where people going from Australia, say, to work in China. There's a focus on pre-departure training, in-country training, and then actually helping people to readjust when they come back. So expatriate assignments are incredibly expensive for companies to launch, and especially when there's families involved and the moving and all that sort of thing. So it's most important to ensure the success of that assignment, and it's often families really that should be involved in the pre-departure training as well, and the in-country support, because they are there often as a support to the expatriate, but if they're having their own adjustment problems, that's also difficult. Okay, so there's various approaches here, and it can, such as presenting facts, analysis and experiential activist learning, so role plays, that can actually sort of really bring out these ideas, what is going to be the difference between me and someone I'm communicating with. And it obviously, if there's a lot of cultural novelty, you've never been to that country before, it's very different, you will need more preparation than someone who's if you're moving to a similar culture, and likewise if you're going to have a high degree of interaction with the locals, obviously it's crucial that pre-departure training and in-country training is considered. So in conclusion, national differences persist even though we do have globalisation, and I think many of us hope they continue to persist. To understand cross-cultural HRD, we can consider institutions and more cultural perspectives as well. But countries and organisations can make very different strategy choices, so it's not as black and white as we might think. We do need to use HRD in preparing international staff for globalised companies as well as for expatriates. So cross-cultural training is important, especially active learning, experiential training, to enhance adjustment and effectiveness. And HRD also plays a key role in transmitting or transferring knowledge across borders between the main head office, say, and its subsidiaries, expatriates and locals, and parties in joint ventures in particular. So there's a lot of learning and education that goes on in these encounters. So next week we're talking about the future of HRD. And obviously in that we can also be considering some of these ideas about cross-cultural HRD and diversity and where we're going to be heading in this particular areas. Thank you.